The check that ended my career at Morrison & Sons Construction was written on the same company letterhead that had once promised me a future. 23 years old, for years of sweat equity, and a handshake agreement with my dead father's business partner, all reduced to a severance payment that wouldn't cover my student loans for 2 months. My uncle William Morrison sat across from me in the same conference room where I'd attended Christmas parties as a kid, where I'd learned to read blueprints on rainy afternoons, where my father had taught me that construction was about building something that would last long after you were gone. Now William couldn't even meet my eyes as he slid the check across the scratched oak table. The reason was simple: his sons needed jobs. Michael and Patrick Morrison had finally graduated from the University of Delaware. Michael with a business degree he'd taken 6 years to complete. Patrick with a communications major that had required 2 summer school sessions to finish. Both of them had spent their college years treating the family business like their personal ATM, drawing allowances while I worked 60-hour weeks for a salary that barely covered my rent in a Dover apartment that smelled like the previous tenant's chain-smoking habit. What William didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that I'd been preparing for this moment since my father's funeral 5 years earlier. While he'd been promising my grieving mother that he'd take care of me, that there would always be a place for me in the company my father had helped build, I'd been watching, learning, planning. Because even at 18, standing in that cemetery in my ill-fitting suit, I'd seen the way William looked at me. Not like family, not like the son of his best friend and business partner, like a liability. Like someone who might one day ask inconvenient questions about profit sharing or ownership stakes, or why the company my father had co-founded was called Morrison & Sons when there had been 2 founding partners. So I'd done what my father had taught me to do when faced with a problem. I'd found a solution. While Michael and Patrick were spending their weekends at fraternity parties and beach houses, I was in the University of Delaware library, teaching myself everything I could about construction technology, project management software, and industrial automation. While they were sleeping off hangovers, I was taking online courses in computer programming and data analytics. While they were living off their trust funds, I was working construction jobs all over Delaware and Maryland, learning not just how to build, but how to build better. The construction industry in 2018 was still operating like it was 1985. Paper schedules, manual inventory tracking, phone calls to coordinate between subcontractors who might or might not show up on time. I'd watched Morrison & Sons lose 3 major contracts in 2 years because they couldn't accurately predict completion dates or material costs. I'd suggested modernizing their systems, implementing project management software, even just upgrading their ancient computers. William had patted me on the head and told me they'd been doing fine without technology for 30 years. But I hadn't been suggesting improvements to Morrison & Sons. I'd been researching my competition. Every weekend for 4 years, I'd been driving to construction sites across Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, talking to contractors, foremen, and project managers. I'd been identifying the pain points that no one was addressing: the miscommunication between trades, the inventory waste, the scheduling conflicts that could derail million-dollar projects. I'd been building relationships with small contractors who were tired of losing money to inefficiency. And I'd been coding. My Dover apartment might have smelled like cigarettes, but it was also home to 3 laptops, 2 external monitors, and a server setup that had cost me every penny of my savings. While my cousins were planning their post-graduation European vacation, I was building the foundation of what would become Build Tech Solutions. The software started simple: a project management platform that could sync schedules between different contractors working on the same job. Instead of relying on phone calls and emails that got lost or ignored, everyone could see real-time updates about deliveries, completions, and delays. But as I tested it with small contractors around Dover and Wilmington, I realized I could do more. Much more. The breakthrough came during a particularly frustrating week at Morrison & Sons. We were working on a shopping center renovation in Newark, and the project was already 3 weeks behind schedule because the electrical contractor hadn't coordinated with the plumbing contractor, who hadn't coordinated with the HVAC contractor, who hadn't coordinated with us. Each trade was blaming the others. The property owner was threatening to impose penalty fees, and William was losing money every day the project dragged on. That night, I went home and spent 14 hours coding a solution. Not just a scheduling tool, but a comprehensive project management system that used artificial intelligence to predict potential conflicts before they happened. Feed it the project requirements, the contractor schedules, the material delivery dates, and the weather forecast, and it would identify every possible bottleneck, delay, and cost overrun before the project even started. I tested it on paper with the shopping center project. The AI predicted that the electrical work would conflict with the plumbing installation on a specific date 3 weeks in the future, creating a delay that would push the entire project back by at least 10 days. It recommended adjusting the electrical schedule by 2 days and the plumbing schedule by 1 day, changes that would cost nothing but would prevent the conflict entirely. I never got the chance to suggest it to William. The next morning, he called me into his office and told me the company was making some difficult decisions about staffing. So I took my severance check, deposited it into my business account, and incorporated Build Tech Solutions as a Delaware LLC. By the end of the week, I had business cards, a website, and my first paying customer, a small contractor in Smyrna who was desperate enough to try anything that might help him finish a residential project on time. The platform worked perfectly. The contractor finished 2 days early and under budget. He told 3 other contractors, who told 3 more. By the end of the month, I had 12 paying subscribers and a waiting list of 20 more. I quit looking for another job and started looking for office space. The first year was brutal. I was working 18-hour days, coding new features, providing customer support, and handling all the business operations myself. I rented a small office in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Dover, furnished it with used equipment from government surplus auctions, and lived on ramen noodles and coffee. But the user base kept growing. Contractors were saving thousands of dollars per project, finishing jobs weeks ahead of schedule, and referring new customers faster than I could onboard them. By the end of year 1, Build Tech Solutions had 847 active subscribers across Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. We were processing over $2 million in construction projects per month. I hired my first employee, a customer service representative named Jennifer Walsh who'd been laid off from a Dover bank. Then I hired a second programmer, Marcus Chun, who'd graduated from Delaware State University with a computer science degree and couldn't find work in his field. Year 2 was when everything changed. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a conversation with a project manager at a Wilmington construction company who mentioned that his biggest challenge wasn't scheduling or communication, but predicting which projects would be profitable. He could estimate costs, but he couldn't predict the 100 small variables that could turn a profitable job into a money-losing nightmare. I spent 6 months developing what I called the Profitability Prediction Engine. It analyzed historical data from thousands of completed projects, identifying patterns that human estimators missed. Weather delays, material price fluctuations, contractor reliability, seasonal labor shortages, regulatory changes. The AI could factor in dozens of variables to predict not just whether a project would be profitable, but by exactly how much. The results were staggering. Contractors using the PP were winning 40% more bids while maintaining higher profit margins. They were avoiding projects that looked profitable but would actually lose money, and identifying opportunities that their competitors were overlooking. Word spread fast. By the end of year 2, we had 2,847 active subscribers and were processing over $20 million in construction projects per month. Construction Weekly featured us on their cover with the headline, "The Future of Construction Management." Industry conferences were inviting me to speak about AI in construction. That's when TechBuild Corporation called. TechBuild was a Fortune 500 company that provided software solutions to the construction industry. They'd been watching our growth and wanted to discuss an acquisition. The initial offer was $12 million. I countered with $25 million. We settled on $18 million, with an additional $7 million in performance bonuses if we hit certain growth targets over the next 2 years. At 26 years old, I was worth more money than I'd ever imagined possible. But more importantly, I had resources. TechBuild wanted me to stay on as CEO of Build Tech Solutions, now operating as a subsidiary with its own budget, development team, and expansion plans. They gave me a team of 20 programmers, a marketing budget of $2 million, and offices in Dover, Wilmington, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. Within 18 months, we'd expanded to all 50 states. We were processing over $200 million in construction projects per month. The team had grown to 93 employees. I'd been featured in Forbes, invited to speak at Stanford Business School, and offered board positions at 3 different tech companies. That's when the phone call started. The first call came on a Tuesday morning in October. Jennifer buzzed me from the front desk to tell me my cousin Michael was on the line. I hadn't heard from Michael Morrison in over 3 years, not since the awkward encounter at my grandmother's funeral where he'd mumbled something about how I was doing okay for myself. Michael's voice was different now, warmer, more familiar. He wanted to know how I was doing, what I'd been up to, whether I'd seen the article about Build Tech Solutions in the Wilmington News Journal. He'd always known I was smart, he said. He'd always thought I'd do something special with my life. I let him talk for 5 minutes before he got to the point. He was looking for new opportunities, he said. The economy was tough, and he was thinking about getting into technology. Maybe we could grab lunch sometime, talk about potential collaboration opportunities. I told him I'd think about it, and hung up. The second call came from Patrick 2 days later. He'd heard about my success through the family grapevine and wanted to congratulate me personally. He'd always believed in me, he said. He'd always thought I had the potential to build something amazing. Patrick had been working in marketing for a small firm in Wilmington, but he was ready for a change. He'd been studying digital marketing and social media strategy. He thought his skills could really complement what I was doing at Build Tech Solutions. I told him I'd keep him in mind if any opportunities came up. The third call came from William himself. I was in my office on a Thursday evening, reviewing quarterly reports, when Jennifer knocked on my door. She looked uncomfortable, which was unusual for her. Jennifer had been with the company for almost 2 years and had seen me handle everything from angry customers to hostile competitors with calm professionalism. "Your Uncle William Morrison is here to see you," she said. "He says it's a family matter." I hadn't seen William in over 3 years. The last time had been at my father's memorial service, where he'd given a speech about partnership and legacy while carefully avoiding any mention of my name. Now he was sitting in my waiting area, looking older and more tired than I remembered. I walked out to meet him. He stood up when he saw me, extending his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Nathan," he said, using the formal version of my name that nobody had called me since elementary school. "You look good. Success suits you." I shook his hand and led him back to my office. He took a moment to look around, taking in the wall of awards, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Dover, the framed photo of me shaking hands with the Delaware Secretary of State at the Small Business Achievement Awards ceremony. "I owe you an apology," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I waited for him to continue. "I made a mistake when I let you go. I was thinking short-term, worried about immediate costs instead of long-term value. I should have recognized your potential, should have found a way to keep you in the company." He paused, studying my face for a reaction. I kept my expression neutral. "The truth is, Nathan, the business isn't doing well. We're losing contracts to companies that can offer faster timelines and more accurate cost estimates. The big firms are eating us alive with their technology and efficiency. We're still operating the same way we did when your father was alive, and it's not working anymore." I nodded. I'd heard through industry contacts that Morrison and Sons had lost 4 major contracts in the past year. They'd been forced to lay off 12 employees, including 2 foremen who'd been with the company for over a decade. I was hoping you might consider coming back, William continued. Not as an employee this time, but as a partner. Full partnership, equal stake in the company. We could really use your expertise, your connections, your technology. I leaned back in my chair, considering my response. What about Michael and Patrick? William's face flushed slightly. They're exploring other opportunities. Michael's thinking about law school, and Patrick's considering a move to Richmond. They've decided the construction industry isn't for them. Translation: they'd been pushed out when it became clear the company was failing. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I'm not looking to join another company right now. I'm pretty committed to Build Tech Solutions. William nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. I understand, but maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement? A licensing deal for your software? We could pay you a percentage of every project we run through your platform. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The thing is, William, we don't do individual licensing agreements anymore. Build Tech Solutions only works with companies that manage at least $50 million in annual construction volume. We've found that smaller operations don't have the infrastructure to fully utilize our platform. His face went pale. How much volume are we talking about for Morrison and Sons? Based on the industry reports I've seen, you're running about 12 million annually. That's down from about 20 million 3 years ago. William's shoulders sagged. But surely there's some kind of family arrangement we could work out? Some way to get access to your technology? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Dover skyline. The city had grown substantially in the past few years, with new office buildings and residential developments stretching toward the horizon. Many of those projects were being managed through Build Tech Solutions. You know what, William? You're right. We are family, and family should help each other. He straightened up, hope flickering in his eyes. I'm going to do something special for you. I'm going to give you a direct referral to our sales team. When you call our main number, just mention that you know me personally. They'll make sure you get priority consideration for our small business package. The hope died in his eyes. Small business package. It's a great deal, actually. Only $800 per month for companies managing under 20 million in annual volume. Most of our customers save that much in the first 2 weeks of using our platform. William stared at me for a long moment, processing what I'd just said. I was offering to sell him the software that could save his company, but I wasn't going to give him any special treatment beyond a priority sales call. $800 a month, he repeated quietly, plus implementation fees and training costs. But those are one-time expenses. The ROI is typically 3 to 1 in the first year. William stood up slowly, his face a mixture of disappointment and resignation. I see. I walked him to the door. Thanks for stopping by, William. It was really good to see you again. He turned back before leaving. Nathan, I know I made mistakes. I know I should have treated you better. But we're family. Surely that means something? I considered his question carefully. You're right. We are family, and families should stick together, support each other, and keep their promises. He nodded, thinking I was agreeing with him. That's why I'm disappointed that you broke your promise to my father. And that's why I'm proud that I kept mine. William looked confused. What promise? The promise to build something that would last. Something that would honor his memory and his values. Something that would help people in the construction industry do better work. I opened the door for him. Build Tech Solutions has helped our customers complete over $5 billion in construction projects. We've saved them hundreds of millions in cost overruns and schedule delays. We've created good jobs for almost 100 people. That's the kind of legacy my father would have been proud of. William walked out without another word. After he left, I sat back down at my desk and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Sarah Morrison, William's daughter, and the only member of the Morrison family who'd stayed in touch with me over the years. Sarah had always been different from her brothers, smarter, more principled, more willing to acknowledge that the family had treated me badly. I sent her a text. "Your dad stopped by the office today. Thought you should know." She responded within minutes. "I heard the company's in trouble. How did it go?" I typed back. "About as well as expected. He offered me a partnership. Are you going to take it?" "Already have everything I need." Three dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "Good for you, Nate. Dad made his choice years ago. Now he gets to live with it." I put the phone away and returned to my quarterly reports. Build Tech Solutions was on track to process over $3 billion in construction projects in the coming year. We had expansion plans for Canada and Europe. Two major competitors had approached us about acquisition deals, both offering more than $50 million. The irony wasn't lost on me that Williams' visit had come during the same week that Forbes was preparing to feature Build Tech Solutions in their 30 Under 30 Technology Edition. The photographer had spent an entire afternoon in my office, capturing shots of me with the Dover skyline in the background, with my team in our state-of-the-art development lab, and standing next to the wall where we displayed letters from contractors whose businesses had been transformed by our platform. One letter in particular had stuck with me. It was from a small contractor in Seaford, Delaware, who'd been on the verge of bankruptcy when he discovered Build Tech Solutions. His company had been losing money on every project because he couldn't accurately predict costs or timelines. Within 6 months of implementing our platform, he not only saved his business, but had grown it from a 3-person operation to a team of 15. He'd written to thank us for giving him the tools to provide for his family and create jobs in his community. That letter represented everything I'd hoped to achieve when I started coding in my cigarette-scented apartment. It wasn't just about building successful software. It was about empowering people who shared my father's values, who understood that construction was about more than just profit margins and corporate politics. The Forbes article, when it was published, would generate more interest than I'd anticipated. Within a week of its release, I received inquiries from venture capital firms, acquisition offers from 3 Fortune 500 companies, and invitations to speak at technology conferences from Silicon Valley to Boston. The attention was flattering, but it also brought unexpected complications. The most significant complication came in the form of a cease and desist letter from Morrison & Sons Construction, delivered to my office on a cold December morning. The letter, signed by a lawyer I'd never heard of, claimed that Build Tech Solutions had been developed using proprietary information and resources belonging to Morrison & Sons, and that the company had intellectual property rights to the platform. I read the letter twice before calling my attorney, Elena Rodriguez, who'd been handling Build Tech's legal affairs since the TechBuild acquisition. Elena was a partner at one of Wilmington's most prestigious law firms, and she'd guided us through everything from employment contracts to patent applications. "This is ridiculous," Elena said after reviewing the letter. "Do they have any documentation to support these claims? Any evidence that you used their resources or proprietary information?" "None whatsoever," I replied. "I developed everything on my own time, using my own equipment in my own apartment. I never used Morrison & Sons computers for personal projects, never accessed their client lists or proprietary information from my platform." Elena was quiet for a moment. "This feels like a desperate attempt to extract money from your success. The timing is suspicious, coming right after the Forbes article. Are you aware of any financial difficulties Morrison & Sons might be experiencing?" I thought about Williams' visit, his obvious desperation, the way he'd aged in the 3 years since I'd last seen him. "I have reason to believe they're struggling financially. This might be an attempt to create a settlement opportunity." "That's what I suspected. Don't worry about this. We'll respond appropriately and make it clear that any continued harassment will result in a countersuit for damages." Elena's response was swift and decisive. Within a week, Morrison & Sons withdrew their cease and desist letter, but not before the legal dispute had generated additional media attention. The Delaware Business Journal ran a story about the David versus Goliath legal battle, portraying me as the innovative entrepreneur being attacked by the established company that had foolishly discarded him. The story included quotes from industry leaders who praised Build Tech Solutions for revolutionizing construction management and criticized Morrison and Sons for their frivolous and baseless legal claims. One quote, from the president of the Delaware Contractors Association, was particularly damaging. This appears to be a desperate attempt by a failing company to profit from the success of someone they had the poor judgment to let go. Within 2 weeks of the article's publication, Morrison and Sons lost their last major contract, a shopping center renovation in Middletown that would have kept them operating for another 6 months. The client, apparently concerned about the company's stability and judgment, terminated their agreement and hired a competitor. I learned about the contract cancellation through Sarah, who called me on a Friday evening, sounding exhausted and frustrated. "Dad's in denial," she said. "He keeps saying the legal challenge was justified, that you somehow stole company secrets. But I know better. I remember how you used to work weekends and evenings on your own projects. I remember you buying your own computers and software because the company equipment was too outdated." Sarah had always been the most perceptive member of the Morrison family. 2 years younger than me, she'd graduated from Georgetown with a degree in business administration and had been working as a financial analyst for a Wilmington investment firm. She tried to convince her father to modernize Morrison and Sons, to invest in new technology and better management systems. But William had dismissed her suggestions just as he'd dismissed mine. "What's going to happen to the company?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Dad's meeting with bankruptcy attorneys next week. He's hoping to find a way to restructure the debt, maybe sell off some equipment and vehicles to stay afloat. But the writing's on the wall." I felt no satisfaction in hearing this news. Morrison and Sons employed 23 people, including several skilled craftsmen who'd been with the company for decades. Their failure would create real hardship for real families, regardless of how I felt about William's treatment of me. "What about you?" I asked Sarah. "Are you going to be okay?" "I'll be fine. My job is stable, and I never depended on the family business for my income. But I'm worried about the employees, especially the older guys who might have trouble finding work elsewhere." An idea began forming in my mind. What if there was a way to help them? Not the company, but the individual employees? Sarah was quiet for a moment. "What do you mean?" "Build Tech Solutions is expanding rapidly. We're opening new offices in Philadelphia and Baltimore, and we need experienced people who understand construction. Not just programmers and salespeople, but people who've actually worked on job sites, who understand the challenges contractors face." "You're talking about hiring Dad's employees?" "I'm talking about offering opportunities to qualified people who need work. If some of those people happen to be Morrison and Sons employees, that's just a coincidence." Sarah laughed, but it was a sad sound. Dad would see it as the ultimate insult. His nephew hiring away his workers after destroying his company. "I didn't destroy his company, Sarah. I built something better. There's a difference." Over the following weeks, I quietly reached out to several Morrison and Sons employees, offering them positions with Build Tech Solutions. Not all of them were qualified for our technology-focused roles, but many had skills that could be valuable in our expanding operations. James Peterson, Morrison and Sons' most experienced project manager, became our director of construction relations, helping us better understand the needs of our contractor clients. Maria Santos, their office manager, joined our customer service team, bringing 20 years of experience managing construction project communications. Robert Chun, a skilled carpenter who'd been with Morrison and Sons for 15 years, became our field representative for the Mid-Atlantic region, visiting construction sites to provide hands-on training for our platform. Each hiring was legitimate and based on merit, but the cumulative effect was devastating for Morrison and Sons. William lost not just his employees, but his most competent ones. The people who remained were either too inexperienced or too loyal to jump ship, leaving him with a workforce that couldn't effectively manage the few projects that remained. The final blow came in March when Morrison and Sons filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company that had employed over 40 people at its peak was reduced to William, his secretary, and 3 field workers. The office building that had housed the company for 25 years was put up for sale. The equipment and vehicles were liquidated at auction. I attended the auction, not to bid on anything, but to pay my respects to the end of an era. Walking through the lot filled with bulldozers, excavators, and trucks that I'd once helped maintain, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. These machines had been part of my childhood, my education, my introduction to the world of construction. Now they were being sold to pay off debts and settle accounts. William was there, of course, supervising the sale with the same attention to detail he'd once applied to construction projects. He looked older than his 58 years, his hair completely gray, his face lined with stress and disappointment. When he saw me, his expression hardened. "Come to gloat?" he asked, his voice carrying a bitterness I'd never heard before. "No," I replied honestly. "I came to remember." He studied my face, perhaps looking for signs of insincerity or mockery. "Remember what?" "The good times. Learning to operate that excavator when I was 16. The Christmas parties in the office. The way you and my father used to plan projects together, staying late to figure out the best way to tackle complicated jobs." William's expression softened slightly. "Your father was a good man. A good partner." "He was. And he'd be disappointed in how this ended." William's face flushed with anger. "This ended because you destroyed my company. You stole my employees. You turned my clients against me. I offered jobs to qualified people who needed work. I interrupted. I built a better solution to problems that were destroying the construction industry. I succeeded where you failed, but I didn't cause your failure." "Then what did?" I considered my answer carefully. "Pride. Stubbornness. The belief that things would always stay the same. The refusal to adapt to changing circumstances." William stared at me for a long moment. "And what about loyalty? What about family? What about the promises we made to each other?" "You broke those promises first," I said quietly. "When you kicked me out to make room for your sons. When you ignored my ideas because they threatened your authority. When you chose nepotism over merit and short-term thinking over long-term success." He had no response to that. I left the auction without buying anything, but I'd accomplished what I'd come to do. I'd said goodbye to the past and confirmed that my future lay elsewhere. 6 months later, I heard through industry contacts that Morrison and Sons had completed its liquidation. William had taken a job as a project manager with a mid-sized firm in Wilmington, working for a salary that was probably less than what I spent on coffee in a month. Michael had indeed enrolled in law school, taking out massive student loans to pay for a degree that might get him a job at a mid-tier firm making $60,000 a year. Patrick had moved to Richmond and was selling insurance. The family construction business that had been built by my father and William Morrison, the company that had promised me a future and then discarded me when it became inconvenient, was gone, dissolved, forgotten. But I didn't celebrate their downfall. I'd learned something important about revenge over the past few years. The most satisfying kind doesn't involve destroying your enemies. It involves building something so successful, so meaningful, so valuable that their absence becomes irrelevant. Meanwhile, Build Tech Solutions continued to grow. We'd expanded to all 50 states and were beginning international operations in Canada and the United Kingdom. Our platform was processing over $500 million in construction projects per month. The team had grown to over 150 employees, including many people who'd found new careers in technology after being displaced from traditional construction jobs. I'd been invited to speak at Harvard Business School about entrepreneurship and innovation. The Delaware Economic Development Office had recognized Build Tech Solutions as the state's fastest-growing technology company. 3 different documentary filmmakers had approached me about telling the story of how a small-town construction worker had built a tech empire. But the recognition that meant the most came from an unexpected source. A letter from the widow of a construction worker who'd been killed in a workplace accident. She wrote to thank me for creating technology that was making construction sites safer and more efficient. Her husband's death had been caused by a communication breakdown between contractors, exactly the kind of problem that Build Tech Solutions was designed to prevent. Reading that letter, I understood that my father's lessons about construction being more than just a business, about it being a way to serve people and build communities, had found their fullest expression not in the family company that had rejected me, but in the technology platform that had grown from that rejection. They'd kicked me out believing I was replaceable, that my contributions were negligible, that my potential was limited. They'd been wrong about everything except one thing. It really wasn't personal. It was just business. The business of building something that would last long after all of us were gone. The business of keeping promises, even when others don't. The business of turning rejection into rocket fuel and disappointment into determination. My father had taught me that construction was about creating something permanent, something that would serve people for generations. I'd taken that lesson and applied it to technology, to business, to life itself. Build Tech Solutions wasn't just a company. It was a monument to the power of persistence, the value of preparation, and the importance of never underestimating the person you're discarding. And unlike the construction projects that had made my father proud, this monument would last forever. The true measure of success, I learned, wasn't in the destruction of those who'd wronged me, but in the creation of something that transcended their limitations. As I sat in my corner office 5 years after that first severance check, watching the sun set over Dover's evolving skyline, I reflected on how dramatically the landscape had changed, both literally and figuratively. The Dover Technology Park, where Build Tech Solutions had relocated its headquarters, hadn't existed when William Morrison first dismissed my suggestions about modernizing the construction industry. Now it housed 14 different tech companies, employed over 2,000 people, and generated more than $1 billion in annual economic activity for Delaware. The park's centerpiece was our 6-story glass and steel building, designed by the same architectural firm that had created Apple's headquarters in Cupertino. What struck me most wasn't the building's aesthetic beauty or its LEED Platinum certification, but the fact that it had been constructed using Build Tech Solutions' own platform. Every phase of the project, from initial planning to final inspection, had been managed through our AI-driven system. The construction timeline had been reduced by 30%. The budget had come in 8% under original estimates, and the project had achieved a safety record that became the new industry standard. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The company that had grown from my rejection was now housed in a building that exemplified everything I'd tried to bring to Morrison & Sons: innovation, efficiency, and a commitment to doing things better. But the real satisfaction came from the letters and emails that arrived daily from contractors across the globe who'd transformed their businesses using our platform. A family-owned construction company in rural Montana had grown from 3 employees to 35 after implementing Build Tech Solutions, allowing them to win contracts they'd never dreamed of pursuing. A women-owned firm in Atlanta had become the fastest-growing contractor in the Southeast by leveraging our AI predictions to underbid competitors while maintaining healthy profit margins. Each success story reinforced my belief that the best revenge wasn't personal, it was systemic. Instead of simply punishing those who'd wronged me, I'd created a platform that elevated everyone who embraced innovation over tradition, merit over nepotism, and vision over short-sightedness. The international expansion had exceeded every projection. Build Tech Solutions now operated in 23 countries, with offices in London, Toronto, Sydney, and Tokyo. Our platform was being used to construct everything from affordable housing in Mumbai to luxury resorts in Dubai. The company that had started in my Dover apartment was now processing over $10 billion in construction projects annually. The recognition that followed was overwhelming. Time magazine named me one of their 40 under 40 leaders shaping the future of business. The World Economic Forum invited me to speak about the digitization of traditional industries. Harvard Business School developed a case study about build tech solutions that was taught in MBA programs worldwide. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source, the Delaware Construction Workers Union. Despite being a technology company that had arguably displaced some traditional construction jobs, we'd been honored for our commitment to worker safety and our efforts to retrain displaced workers for careers in construction technology. The union president, a weathered man named Frank DeMarco, who'd spent 40 years working on construction sites throughout Delaware, presented me with their annual Innovation Award at a ceremony in Wilmington. His speech that night captured something I'd been trying to articulate for years. Technology isn't the enemy of construction workers, DeMarco said. Bad planning, poor communication, and dangerous working conditions are the enemies. Nathan Morrison understood that, and he built something that makes our jobs safer, our projects more successful, and our industry more sustainable. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on me. Frank DeMarco had worked on several projects for Morrison and Sons over the years, including the shopping center renovation that had been plagued by delays and cost overruns. He'd seen firsthand how poor project management could turn a profitable job into a money-losing nightmare for contractors and a dangerous environment for workers. After the ceremony, Frank pulled me aside for a private conversation that would stay with me for years. "Your Uncle William was a decent man," he said, "but he was stuck in the past. He couldn't see that the industry was changing, that workers like me needed better tools and safer conditions. What you built, it's not just software. It's a bridge between the old way of doing things and the new way." That conversation crystallized something I'd been thinking about for months. Build Tech Solutions wasn't just a revenge story or a business success story. It was a transformation story, a demonstration that innovation could honor tradition while transcending its limitations. The personal vindication, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. I was testifying before a Senate subcommittee on infrastructure and technology when I noticed a familiar face in the gallery. Michael Morrison, now 3 years into his law school program, was sitting in the back row, taking notes on a legal pad. He'd apparently secured an internship with one of the senator's offices and was attending the hearing as part of his educational experience. After my testimony about how AI-driven construction management could reduce infrastructure costs by up to 20%, Michael approached me in the hallway outside the hearing room. "Nathan," he said, extending his hand with a nervous smile, "I wanted to congratulate you on your testimony. Very impressive." I shook his hand, noting how much older he looked. Law school had apparently been more challenging than his undergraduate experience, and the stress showed in his face. "Thank you," I replied. "How are you finding law school?" "Challenging," he admitted. "But good. I'm specializing in corporate law, actually. Technology and intellectual property issues." The conversation that followed was awkward but illuminating. Michael had apparently been following Build Tech Solutions' growth through industry publications and news coverage. He'd watched our expansion, our acquisitions, our international success. He'd seen the Forbes articles, the Harvard case study, the World Economic Forum presentations. "I need to ask you something," he said finally. "Did you plan this? Back when you were working for Dad, did you know you were going to build something that would compete with us?" I considered the question carefully. I planned to build something meaningful with my skills and knowledge. I didn't plan to destroy Morrison and Sons, but I also didn't plan to limit my potential to protect your father's comfort zone. Michael nodded slowly. "Dad always said you were too ambitious for your own good." I think he meant it as a criticism, but looking at what you've accomplished. "Ambition without opportunity is just frustration," I said. "Your father gave me ambition but took away opportunity, so I created my own." What happened to our company? That wasn't personal for you. It became personal when your father broke his promises to my family. But the success of Build Tech Solutions isn't about Morrison and Sons. It's about building something better than what came before. Michael was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, he said finally, for how Dad treated you, for how Patrick and I treated you. We were young and stupid and entitled. The apology was unexpected but not unwelcome. We were all young, I said. The difference is that some of us learned from our mistakes. After Michael left, I found myself thinking about the conversation for days. His apology had been genuine, but it had also revealed something important about the nature of vindication. The satisfaction I felt wasn't from hearing him admit they'd been wrong. It was from knowing that I'd proven them wrong through my actions rather than my words. The final chapter of the Morrison and Sons story came 2 years later, when Sarah called to tell me that William had died of a heart attack at his office in Wilmington. He'd been working late on a project proposal, trying to help his new employer win a contract that would have been routine for Morrison and Sons in its heyday. I attended the funeral, not out of obligation or sentiment, but out of respect for the man who'd taught me important lessons about both business and character. The service was held at the same church where my father's funeral had taken place 8 years earlier. Many of the same people were there, former employees, industry colleagues, family friends who'd known both men during their partnership. The eulogy, delivered by Michael, was honest about William's failings as well as his virtues. He'd been a skilled craftsman and a fair employer, but he'd also been stubborn and resistant to change. He'd built a successful business, but he'd also destroyed it through his inability to adapt to new realities. My father was a man of his time, Michael said. He believed in hard work, personal relationships, and traditional values. Those beliefs served him well for many years, but they also limited him when the world began to change. After the service, I stood by my father's grave for a few minutes, thinking about the promises we make and the promises we keep. William Morrison had promised my father that he'd take care of me, that there would always be a place for me in the company they'd built together. He'd broken that promise, but in doing so, he'd forced me to discover capabilities I might never have developed if I'd stayed in the comfortable but limited role he'd envisioned for me. My father had taught me that construction was about building something that would last, something that would serve people long after the builders were gone. I'd taken that lesson and applied it to technology, to business, to life itself. Build Tech Solutions wasn't just a monument to my own success. It was a testament to the enduring value of the principles my father had instilled in me. As I walked away from the cemetery, I thought about the letter I'd received the previous week from a construction worker in Oregon. His company had been using Build Tech Solutions for 2 years, and he'd written to thank me for creating technology that had made his job safer and more efficient. His 15-year-old son, he'd mentioned, was now studying computer science because he wanted to work for Build Tech Solutions someday. That letter represented everything I'd hoped to achieve: the marriage of innovation and tradition, the elevation of skilled workers through better tools, the creation of opportunities for the next generation. It was a legacy that would outlast any personal grudge, any family feud, any business rivalry. The boy in Oregon who wanted to work for Build Tech Solutions would grow up in a world where construction was safer, more efficient, and more rewarding than it had been for his father. He would have opportunities that previous generations couldn't have imagined, not because I'd sought revenge against those who'd wronged me, but because I'd chosen to build something better than what I'd inherited. That, I realized, was the most satisfying revenge of all, not the destruction of my enemies, but the creation of a future where their limitations became irrelevant, where their mistakes became stepping stones, where their failures became the foundation for something greater. The monument I'd built would indeed last forever, not as a testament to my own vindication, but as a bridge between the world that had rejected me and the world that embraced the vision they'd failed to see. Thanks for listening to this powerful story. Subscribe for more stories about the surprising ways people change our lives for the better. See you in the next story.